Hello. The purpose of this video is to discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was passed back in 1990, and what it did was made sure that Americans with disabilities will not be discriminated. Um, and the impact is that the buildings that are designed should accommodate for people with disabilities. It's a little controversial because it did uh, make construction of the building a little bit more expensive because you do have to provide accommodations for people with disabilities. So the existing buildings or historical buildings um, are largely exempted from providing service or providing access for people with disabilities, and largely because doors will not accommodate wheelchairs for these old buildings, or the heights of steps are not going to fit within the requirements of the ADA. So mostly old buildings are exempted, or existing buildings before 1990 is exempted. It has been revised a few times, and those revisions may be largely impacting buildings, but again, in each revision, those buildings that have been designed before are largely grandfathered. Okay. The city of Sacramento has its own Americans with Disabilities page, and you can go through these um, and read through their statements and some of their documents relating to do this people with disabilities. They have their own PDF that talks about people with disabilities in terms of um, employment or accommodation, okay, and all that other stuff. So that's available through the Sacramento website. All you have to do is do a ADA search for Sacramento, and this should pop up. There's been numerous lawsuits, and some of the I guess predators out there who wants to make a buck or make money would actually try to find fault on buildings that are relatively new that has a checklist failed. So it could be as simple as slope on the sidewalk, or the slope towards the step, or even the height of the step. So there would be people who would be checking, and that those people primarily would have some sort of disability, and they would file a complaint, and or sometimes even directly go and bring a lawsuit for a business or establishment. It became ridiculous for a while. I think it has died down, and the courts have dismissed them. Before, it was very rampant. Okay. Now there are cheat sheets available which discusses the ADA, but just be careful because some of them are have been revised, like this cheat sheet, for example, here. Again, it's for new buildings, and it says we have the same chart or table that we've discussed, that when you have parking of at least 25, 1 to 25, one of them should be van accessible, just like our case. Uh, the owner wants to provide parking slots, and therefore one of them must be van accessible. Um, but if you look at this one here, the diagram over here says a van accessible or parking can be 9 feet and 5 feet here, which is right. This is still correct. but one of them should be van accessible. Okay, so this other parking over here, if it's van accessible, uh, cannot be 9 feet. It has to be 11 feet to accommodate a 5 feet. So if there's two van accessibles, and this wouldn't work. This has been probably revised. The best way is to go to your California building codes because they have widely adopted the Americans with Disability Acts in terms of design under Chapter 11. The first one is housing accessibility, and the other one is accessibility public buildings. So this is what we're concerned with right now is the accessibility on public buildings. And if you go through them, they will talk and give the same language as the Americans with Disabilities Act, so because they have been largely adapted over here. We adapted the entire chapter of the AC, okay, and it's been widely addressed here. So if you look at like that site plan that we have, general site building elements, you can see now that if you have parking or disabled parking, one of them must be van accessible, and if it's van accessible, then it's supposed to be 144 inches minimum with a 5 foot aisle. Okay, so uh, most of these have been addressed here in the building code. So you don't need to like open any other building code book, but um, there are books out there, even websites that's really geared to Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you search like ADA, one of them is this website, which is relatively a new website. So this one is just has been launched, and it does not. I don't think it has all of the um, disability accommodations in terms of building code or requirements, which is public accommodation, or ADA stands for accessible design. When you click that, there are these two PDFs that they've created. They just haven't uploaded on their website. If you click here, there are topics here, and they're still working on it, but they did release standards for accessible design out of these two books. The Disabilities Act have been revised last 2008. Um, so the revisions in terms of public accommodation, which includes design and accessibility, um, is about like bus routes here for disabilities, people with disabilities, but some of the public accommodations, like um, restaurants and hotels, okay, they really wanted to make sure that people with disabilities are not uh, discriminated upon. And then if there's a barrier that is existing in place, it must be removed to accommodate. So now there are reasonable changes that need to happen even for existing buildings or have an alternative. But no construction, it they must comply. Okay, so this was the last change in the law. And so if we go back to the ADA website and open up accessibility or open up one of these files, okay, we will see this accessibility design, and you can go through them. This is an official government um, information release or guidelines. Uh, and disability access design will probably be down here, starting with the site plan. So the ADA does not just talk about design; it talks about also postings, colors, heights of letters, and all that other stuff, signage. So we're not just going to talk about parking. It also will talk about the signage that you can find in parking lots, um, the color of those signage, the height of the text, and everything like that. And it could be as small as a change in or a change in elevation of the floor. So if you have a carpet pile, those carpet pile cannot be higher than half an inch. Okay. So even though small things are listed there, if you have grates or openings, the opening on a grate or cover, metal cover, cannot be wider than half an inch. Okay, and the grates must be, I guess, perpendicular to the travel or dominant travel direction. Okay, if there is a change in floor, let's say you decide to put a tile, then the difference between one side or the lower side to the top of the tile can only be a quarter inch max. So those little things they do address those little stuff. Okay, if you have a change that is or you can't do without just a quarter and you have a higher change in height, you do have to make sort of a small ramp or bevel the edge. So if you have a half an inch difference, then you have to bevel the change. And I think the half an inch is the max with the bevel. Okay. Um, turning space for people in wheelchair. You have that's defined in the ADA. So people in wheelchair, the space that they occupy is defined as 30 by 48. So if you need or will design something for people in wheelchair, like counters, there should be a space for them, and that should be the clear space for them. Okay. If you have a nook or an alcove, and you have this sometimes where you have a phone booth doesn't exist no more really, but if you will put in a drinking fountain on an alcove because you don't want a drinking fountain to stick out of the wall, and that alcove must accommodate a person in a wheelchair that's perpendicular or parallel to that alcove. Okay, so it's a lot more here. You can see that this is the space for the foot of the person in the wheelchair. It must clear a height of 9 inches and 6 inches. So if this was the drinking fountain, it can only stick out 17 to 25 inches from the space provided for the disabled person. Okay, so as you can see, this is what we have here. You cannot have the bottom of that counter if it's projecting be lower than 27 inches. Otherwise, the person's knee will not fit. Okay, those other stuff. Blind people with canes, we cannot, if they are walking in a corridor, anything that projects um, like display case, picture frames, stuff like that, it has a maximum of 4 inches to project because people with wheelchair, I mean, blind people with canes can't see and might hit that projection. So a 4-inch projection is the max allowed. That other stuff, you know, you will see some stairs with the like this metal barriers on them, and that's to stop blind people from hitting their head underneath the stairs. So there's a lot of things addressed here. Heights of buttons or things that need to be pressed or accessed. Um, ATM machines, the buttons must be a particular height, 48-inch max, because people in wheelchair, if it's higher than 48 inches, they cannot reach it. Okay, so a lot of things, small things that you think are small, but it's definitely designed to accommodate people with disabilities. Okay, doors must have a certain width, and we've discussed that on the schematic plan, because you have to plan for them. Because that's the reality. Okay, so it's not just parking; it could even be slope to the sidewalk. You have to have a slope that meets a certain angle or percentage. Okay, so it is extensive, including signage that has to have braille, and the letters must be raised with certain heights. Okay, elevators we've talked about in our schematic floor plan discussion or lecture. There's a lot more that's in this one. Parking again. So this is more up to date because this was released by the government. Later on, we're going to have to put handrails in our stairs, and the handrails have to meet ADA code. Okay, must be the space must have a minimum of 1.5 from the wall sticking out, and it must have a particular height, and the shape must also be either a rounded shape or an ellipse for the handrail. Okay, so handrails, y- you cannot just make any handrail that you want. It's governed here. It must stick out 12 inches beyond the last step of a ramp, or the edge of a ramp, or last step of the stair. Yeah, there's a lot more. Here's plumbing, drinking fountains, and stuff like that. Um, Restroom, closets, water closets. In fact, on your project, you will have to provide restrooms, and I know there's two restrooms, and those restrooms must fit the ADA requirements. And typically, the ADA requirements state um, the size or the required turning radius inside of a restroom. Um, if there's any urinals up here, right, it has to fit this this description or this requirements of the ADA. It hasn't really changed. This portion hasn't really changed much. In particular, the restroom. So, in fact, if you open up a new tab and type in ADA restroom and go to images, there you can see a lot of these restrooms have been solved or previously done before, and you will have to create a detail of this restroom later on. Okay, so you would have to actually um, make sure uh, that there is a 5 foot turning radius. Let's click on this one. 5 foot turning radius. That the center line of maybe we can open this bigger. Open in new tab. Open image in new tab. There you go. Whoop. It's still small. Anyway, see if I can. Center line of the water closet must be 16 to 18 inches away from the edge, and Always, when you go to like a public restroom in a school, university, you're gonna see these grab bars, and they're dictated here. People in wheelchairs should be able to turn around, and that's why that's this circle that's 60 inches minimum. Then you have that space underneath that sink that's supposed to accommodate people in a wheelchair. That's a clear 30-inch space. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel, because you have sizes now that you can see that fits the ADA requirements. 7'4", 6'6". Now the door, if it opens then you need to make sure that the swing is not doesn't overlap with the 5 foot turning radius by a certain amount. Okay, you can overlap them, but not uh, by only a certain percentage. So it's definitely better to have the door swing out of the restrooms instead of swinging in, because there's another requirement on that one. Okay. Um, yeah, so it's given here. You got different sizes. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can find out. You just have to make sure that these little things, see this the overlap. If you do want to swing the door in, the maximum overlap is 12 inches. Bigger overlap is not allowed anymore. Okay, so yeah, don't reinvent the wheel. You can search for it. Um, you can you can find this PDF on the ADA website here. Maybe I could just provide a link for you on our module, so you can access these documents directly without really finding them yourself. And there's a lot. Um, Sometimes you'll see on parking lots, or like if you go to Costco, when you cross the driveway in Costco, you're going to see bollards, and then you're going to see these yellow things that on the ground when you roll over with your cart just vibrates crazy, and that's your dome or truncated domes. And the reason why they're there is because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, where blind people should be able to know when they're crossing a driveway. When they cross a driveway, if they can't see, they can only feel. And when they step on those truncated domes, then they know that, oh, I'm crossing a driveway. You don't need domes if you have a raised curb, but just like in Costco, we don't have a raised curb. We just have a flat uh, level so that people can cross anywhere uh, and push their cart without going through a ramp. But in doing so, you need to provide a way for blind people to know that they're crossing a driveway, and that's where the truncated domes come in. Okay, so that was little stuff, and very very extensive. You have a lot of information here, heights of difference in heights in movie theaters. You would see that they have um, people in handicap wheelchair. They have their own spots, not because um, they need their own spot, but because they cannot see. Uh, if it's too low, then the head of people will block their view. So those kind of things have been addressed, have been accommodated in apartments. Uh, the gap between appliance and cabinet or whatever must be 40 inches. So in an apartment building, there would be a percentage of the units that are open for ADA for people with disabilities, and those units have been designed specifically for people with disabilities, and they have to meet these requirements um, for the design of their kitchens and stuff like that. Okay, so very very extensive. It'll take us a lot more hours to discuss these things. So you can go through them, or you can access these whenever you bump into some situation. I certainly don't have all of them memorized, but just the common ones that is usually part of the design process, which is a site plan. So it's parking, sidewalks, handrails, ramps, doors. Um, I don't really memorize them, but I know that there are requirements to them, and I just have to go back to the building code or to a document like this to see the difference or the impact of what I'm doing if it meets ADA, because we need to be compliant. We don't want a lawsuit to happen to our client. And if it's a new building and he gets a lawsuit, guess what? He or she will drag the architect into that lawsuit. Say, hey, my architect, um, okay, that. So I didn't know. I was reliant on my architect's design, and so the architect has a lot of responsibility to make sure that the building meets ADA requirements in terms of accessibility. Okay. Yeah. So I will leave this document a link to our module, but you can also access them directly from the ada.gov website, and you simply have to go and click the link when on the front page, ADA standards. You click that, and you're going to see these. Okay, so later on, when you submit your drawings done in AutoCAD, and we are reviewing them, uh, we have to find those elements that needs to be compliant with the ADA. All right. So yeah. So happy planning.